Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and the iPhone XR is one of those phones that you either love or maybe you've heard some bad things about regarding its display and you've kind of avoided altogether. However, I wanted to help you decide if you should still buy it in 2022. Now, Apple discontinued it this past year as being sold new on Apple.com or within the Apple Store, but you can still pick it up refurbished from them from around $400 or so. However, you can get it used between $300 and $500, and at that price, it may be a really great value for some. It's probably the least expensive phone at this point with Face ID. So if you like Face ID, of course it has Face ID. And I wanted to go over not only price and things like that, but durability and more. Now, durability-wise, it's had this case on it, and this is the Apple Clear case. And quite a few people really like these cases because they don't seem to yellow over time. However, you can see that there's actually a crack or fracture down my case, and that's from removing it over and over. They seem to become a little bit brittle, and that's something that I've seen on multiple Clear cases from Apple. So if you remove your phone from these cases a lot, I wouldn't recommend it, but if you want a clear case to show off the back of the phone, or you just enjoy the color that you picked, such as product red that I have here, then I would recommend picking one up. Otherwise, if you remove it a lot, of course it's going to crack, and it cracks fairly easily. They're hard to remove, and that might be part of the problem. So you'll see here's the crack here, and like I said, it's protected the phone well. It has a lot of scratches on it from being set down, but in general it does a pretty good job. So I recommend them, but not if you're going to be removing your phone from it a lot. Now, durability-wise, the XR's display has been holding up pretty well. It does have a few scratches, just like the 11 series phones that seem to not hold up as well as maybe the current ceramic shield, but it has some scratches on the oleophobic coating, and that's pretty easy to fix by just putting a screen protector on it. So if you're concerned about that, of course, you can just put a screen protector. The frame overall has held up well. This is the product red edition, and it has an aluminum frame, and it might have a few specks here and there where it's actually lost some of its coating, but generally they hold up pretty well as long as you're not bumping them into maybe a ring or something along those lines. So as long as you're not really smacking it into something, you've got it in a case, they'll hold up really well. Even if you don't have it in a case, as long as you take good care of your phone, you won't have a problem. The back glass has held up well. The camera lens really has no issues whatsoever. It seems to have not had a single scratch on it, and it's doing well also. So durability-wise, the XR seems to be pretty good. Now, of course, like I said, it has Face ID, and Face ID works nice and fast. No problems really with that. It's fairly sunny out, and it works fine in this light. So if I unlock the phone, it works fine. No issues there. But the display is not super smooth, as you may have seen when I unlock it, compared to maybe a new ProMotion display on the 13 Pro Max or 13 Pro. So you will have fairly smooth scrolling when it comes to iOS in general. You typically get that. But as far as the smoothness you get with ProMotion, you're just not going to get those latest features. But that's okay because it's not the latest phone. One of the major complaints of this is its display. It's between 720 and 1080p. It's 1792 by 828 pixels with 326 pixels per inch. That's not really an issue for me, but some people seem to think it's an issue. If you're looking at one directly, you can't see the pixels, and as we get closer, unless you get really close, maybe with a macro lens, you're not going to notice any difference. I've shown this multiple times to people that do videography full-time, film things, and they didn't notice any difference next to an iPhone X when that was out. I showed them, and maybe you'll see some fuzzing around the edges as they sort of shrink the pixels to get that bended curve or the liquid retina display, as Apple calls it. However, it seems to be fine. So the other good thing about it is it doesn't have PWM to control brightness. You'll see I'm at full brightness, and it's not using PWM or flashing the display faster or slower to control brightness. That's something that seems to bother quite a few people's eyes, about 1 in 10, myself included, and I often found myself going back to the iPhone XR when that was an issue on some of the early Apple OLED displays. It's not so much of an issue today with the latest displays, but on the XR, that's one benefit of it. It has pretty good viewing angles, and it's fairly bright. But we're outside in bright sunlight, recording this in HDR, and it seems to do okay, although it's not as bright as the latest OLEDs, where they go up to 1200 nits of brightness for HDR, and right now we're around 625 nits. So it's not super bright, but it's good enough to see in sunlight, as you can see here. The speakers have held up well. Of course, you've got your speaker and microphone on the bottom, with your speaker at the top with a decent stereo sound, so no issues there. They've held up fine. They're not as loud as the latest phones, but they're plenty loud for most people, and most people will have no issues with it. As far as the battery life, this is an area where it's a pretty good phone. Because it's not pushing a ton of pixels, it will get between 5 to 7 hours of battery life or screen on time, typically between 5 and 6 for most people, but it varies depending on use. And this device, I didn't use it full time all of the time, so it has 100% battery health, but typically you'll get about 80% after 2 years as Apple intended. And then you can replace the battery for around $60 or so and continue using it at full speed. So it's a nice and fast phone. It has Apple's A12 Bionic in it, and it seems to not really have an issue whatsoever. So you can play the latest games, whether that be Minecraft or something else. You can go through your app library and scroll pretty much like the same as any other device. Let's load Minecraft here and just see how long it takes. So we'll give it just a moment. So we'll hit create, we'll wait for it to create a new world, and this is not as fast as the latest devices. I showed this in a comparison between all of them in a recent video where I showed it between the iPhone SE and everything Apple currently sells, and these devices are pretty fast. Once they're loaded, you'll get good frame rates and more, but loading them in general takes a little bit of time. So they won't load as fast, but if you're playing Minecraft or Call of Duty or something else, they should be just fine once they're loaded. You just won't get into the games as fast. However, if you're recording 4K video with it, it can export that video no problem. And the camera on it is great. The rear camera is 4K 60, so you have the option, if we go here to video, 4K 60, as you can see here in the options. However, the one thing you don't have is HDR. So you don't have the option of HDR like the latest phones with Dolby Vision HDR, but you have 4K 60, which is fine for most. But the forward-facing camera is a little lacking. So if we go into the forward-facing camera, you can see I'm recording here with the camera and my microphone. And if we hit record, we have HD at 60 frames per second. So let me change it to the current frame rate. And now we're recording with the forward-facing camera of the iPhone XR. You can hear the microphone from it. The background is a bit washed out, and I've brightened it so it would match this video, but either way, it's just not that great as compared with the latest phones. So if you get something newer, you're going to have a much better experience when it comes to the forward-facing camera. The microphone should be okay as well, but it's still not going to be as good as maybe a studio mic or something like that. But it should get you by if you wanted to record this and put this on YouTube. Now, as far as the reception of this device, it's pretty good. It's actually better than some of the other phones when they came out, and I don't know if that has to do with the aluminum, since that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me, but the reception seemed to be better. I dropped less calls and had good connectivity. However, we don't have 5G millimeter wave or anything like that. We just have a single SIM card tray here, and it works fine with LTE and 4G. But again, you won't get 5G, but for many people that doesn't really matter, as 5G tends to use a little bit more battery right now, until they sort of get that technology up to the point where it doesn't. It does have an IP rating of IP67 for 1 meter up to 30 minutes, which means you could get it in some water. Maybe you splashed it with something, it got rained on, it would be fine. However, I would not recommend bringing it into water, such as the lake behind me or into a swimming pool, anything like that, without a waterproof case. Apple does not warrant water damage whatsoever. So if it gets into the speakers or different ports, they're not going to warrant that damage, and you'll have to pay to replace it. So I typically recommend on any phone to put a waterproof case. This includes Samsung as well. They won't cover water damage despite it having a higher IP rating. So IP68 on the iPhone seems to be one of the best on the newest iPhones, but again, they won't cover that. Now, as far as iOS updates, we're at iOS 15 at the making of this video, and so I would expect this to get support maybe for another 2 to 3 years. iOS 18 maybe, but Apple never specifies how long they're going to support iOS. So you won't get the latest features of the newest phones, but I would expect some new features with iOS 16 and beyond, and support for years to come with security updates. Apple is still pushing iOS 12 updates, so those contain security updates for older phones. You can expect the same for this device. So once you get it, it basically will become a reliable device that you can depend on, and it will do what it did when you purchased it new. As the battery degrades over time, you can replace it and the speed will come right back to where it was originally. And that leads me to, should you pick up an iPhone XR in 2022? Well, one main advantage is it doesn't have PWM like I mentioned before, and you can probably get it pretty reasonably, around $300 to $400. If you can get it for that price point, you may want to opt for this. However, the iPhone 11 with its dual cameras is a better buy with a newer chipset and basically the same display. So I would go for the 11 if you could. The XR is fine if you're getting it really reasonably. Now, if it's around $500 or $600, then I would just get a new iPhone 13 at that point. 13 mini or 13, opt for one of those or a leftover 12, as that's going to give you many more features, the latest display, and more. So again, it comes down to budget, or if someone's handing one down, or you can get one very reasonably. So if you can get one at a really inexpensive price, then definitely pick one up. If not, I would opt for an 11 or something else newer at this point. But let me know your opinion about the iPhone XR. If you have one, if you're switching to something else, I'd love to hear what you're switching to. Or maybe you're picking one up. You've got a great deal on it. I'd love to hear what it costs where you live. If you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, of course, I'll link it in the description like I normally do. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.